on this episode of the WildFed podcast.
If you can look at the yield of a fish at 90% instead of 45%, that is realizing its full value.
Watching the collars, watching the livers go over the boat and the seagulls tearing into it, it's brutal.
The butchery model, it's the perfect model. Anything that you can execute with an animal, you should be able to execute with fish.
You're not there just trying to present something radical. You really understand what people are wanting to eat.
Fish eyeball ice cream, what's he talking about? We make salamis out of fish, the yellowfin tuna cheeseburger.
That deep red, almost jewel-like translucency that I imagine comes from that moisture leaving the fish. It's so uncommon to see it. And when I see those pictures, I'm like, I want to work with that.
We need to be enthusiastically coming at this and trying to bring it to the mainstream. And that's like taking fish out of the trash and putting it into something that is glamorous.
Episode 105 of the WildFed podcast, Scale to Tail, the whole fish with Josh Niland, is brought to you by Surthrival. Proper digestion is critical to good health and strong immunity. That's why I'm a huge believer in using Surthrival's colostrum daily in my smoothies, and it's why I take Surthrival digestive bitters with my meals. In addition to being 3 times more effective against flu than vaccines in vivo studies with high-risk patients, bovine colostrum is an outstanding supplement for restoring the delicate lining of your digestive tract, making it a great health support to anyone looking to improve their digestion. And herbal bitters help increase the flow of bile and other digestive juices, helping ensure we extract more nutrition from the food we eat. Right now until November 4th, Surthrival's flagship colostrum products and herbal digestive bitters are on sale, and the coupon code TREAT20, that's TREAT 20, gets you 20% off those products at surthrival.com. I get to travel a lot, and when I tell people I'm from Maine, they always tell me how much they love Maine lobsters. So I always tell them about MaineLobsterNow.com. Nothing's healthier than fresh seafood that comes right off the dock. Now you can bring fresh, natural seafood home no matter where you live with MaineLobsterNow.com. MaineLobsterNow.com ships fresh, live lobsters. I repeat, these are still living lobsters overnight right to your door anywhere in the country, and they come with excellent, simple cooking instructions. They've also got fresh lobster tails, full lobster roll kits, colossal Alaskan king crab legs, scallops, mussels, and a wide assortment of fresh fish and more. Use the coupon code WildFedLobster for $10 off your first order at MaineLobsterNow.com. Demand more from your seafood and experience Maine lobsters delivered right to your door with MaineLobsterNow.com. I'm Daniel Vitalis, and you're listening to the WildFed podcast, a show about reconnecting with nature through hunting, fishing, foraging, and food. WildFed. Food is all around you. Our guest today, Josh Niland, is changing the way the culinary world thinks about fish. From the way we handle it to how we store it to the way it's cooked, Josh has single-handedly created a new school of fish cuisine. And though part of it is a strong ethic of using more of the animal, that's really just the beginning. But imagine, at present, in restaurants and at home, only about 45% of a fish is utilized for food. Now imagine a James Beard award-winning chef who's getting 90% yield and creating dishes no one's ever conceived of before. Like I said, though, there's more. Josh is dry aging fish too, discovering that with proper storing, and contrary to all convention, the flavor of fish flesh, like that of land animals, can be improved with hanging time, provided it's kept dry and cold. For instance, as you'll hear in this interview, and in contrast to what most of us would think, swordfish aged using his method is best on day 18. Josh Niland has written 2 incredible books, both of which, if you fish yourself or you just like eating seafood, need to be in your kitchen. The first, The Whole Fish Cookbook, New Ways to Cook, Eat, and Think, won the James Beard Award for Book of the Year, just one of the many awards it received. His follow-up book, which was just recently released, Take One Fish, The New School of Scale-to-Tail Cooking and Eating, is just as good and equally, or maybe even more, useful to the angler or home cook. It's hard to overstate the impact Josh's work is going to have on the science and art of processing and cooking fish. If nothing else, it'll change the way you see fish forever. I've been slowly adopting what I've learned in his books, and getting to talk with him was very exciting to me. I, for one, am slowly shifting my approach to handling, processing, aging, cooking, and eating fish. There's a lot of habit, convention, and institutional inertia to overcome. But the results Josh is getting make it clear. We can do more to honor the fish we eat, the people we feed, and the oceans, lakes, rivers, and ponds we harvest from. 55% waste is unacceptable. Let's start eating scale to tail.
Josh Niland, welcome to the show.
Hi, how are you?
Man, I am so excited to talk to you. I've had your book, The Whole Fish Cookbook, for a time, and I just got Take One Fish. And man, I'm just over the moon to get a chance to speak with you like this. Thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having me. Excited to have a chat.
Yeah, man. I'm headed out in the morning. I'm actually in a hotel right now. I'm headed out in the morning on a bluefin tuna fishing trip. So it's kind of serendipitous that I'm talking to you, because there's a lot I want to go over about the care and use of fish. But let's get a little bit into who you are, man. I've been watching videos of you all day, getting a little sense of your backstory. But for folks who are new to you, tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Yeah, my name's Josh Niland, and I'm an Australian. I've grown up in, I suppose, an area called the Hunter Valley in a state called New South Wales. And, you know, where I grew up was probably 2.5 hours from where I am now in my restaurant here in Sydney. But growing up, mum and dad owned their own small business, and I had an older sister. And, you know, I didn't grow up with a rod and reel in my hand, and I didn't, you know, find myself, you know, at the beach too often either. Like, it was a relatively standard upbringing of playing lots of soccer, playing cricket, you know, just, you know, hurting myself too much and all that sort of stuff. I had a childhood cancer when I was 8. And the reason I mention that is it kind of opened a lot of doors later down the line for people that I met and for foundations that I spoke at. And it allowed me to meet some chefs that I even ended up working with down the line later at quite a young age. So I built and developed quite a rapport with some pretty amazing chefs at that time. And I started my apprenticeship as a chef when I was 15. And so that meant I left school short of finishing my full kind of school time. So I finished in year 10. And yeah, I went straight into cooking. So 15, 16 years old, I was, you know, had really sore feet, and I was growing as a young man, and also, you know, trying to improve my skills as, you know, as a chef. And so I got to work in a restaurant that was half an hour from my house, which meant that I could get my license quicker. So my mum would drive me to work and I would drive home. So it was quite a good way to learn how to begin to fend for myself a little bit, which was good. And then I decided when I was 17, after working in Newcastle for a year, I said to mum and dad that I was really wanting to get to Sydney to work. So I moved out of home when I was 17 to live by myself in the city, which was quite a big, daunting task at that age. And, you know, I found myself coming back every weekend to try to get mum to do the laundry for me, just because there's a lot of chef's jackets to keep white. But yeah, I worked for some amazing chefs in Sydney. I you know, started in a French brasserie that was 250 seats, and, you know, got absolutely put through the ringer, trying to understand what I was doing and how to get faster and how to get more efficient. So it was quite a, you know, in the beginning it was torture. You know, I would sleep in the change rooms from time to time because I didn't think that I would get all my work done in time if I had to go home. But I mean, I care, like, obviously still do, but I cared a lot about my work, and I cared a lot about what people thought of my work as well. So self-inflicted in terms of the hours that I put in. And then I went on and worked in a very high-end restaurant where I got to really see fine dining, I suppose. And by doing that, I became really infatuated with the fish station of the kitchen. And fish, to me, it almost presented itself somewhat very similar to pastry. And the reason I say that is it's just really, it got presented so exacting, and everything needed to be perfect. And everybody's knives needed to be so sharp. And so, transitioning into a fish area of a very high-end restaurant was really difficult and challenging because all of your portions needed to be correct, all your yields needed to marry up to what we were selling it for. And so I liked that, and I really got a lot out of that experience. And without boring you too long, I asked my chef, could I get into, what would he suggest the best way be for me to pursue something more specific to fish, because I just got a lot out of it. And he sent me off to a restaurant called Fish Face, and Fish Face was owned and operated by a gentleman who I'd met at one of these, Cancer Foundation things when I was so much younger. And so I already had a rapport with this gentleman, and he really took me under his wing and technically showed me the black and white 101 mantra of how to work with the fish. And so much of that learning has been consistent then with my methods that I do now. But there was so much, I think it was more just trigger conversations that sparked creative opportunity then that I've been able to realize myself. So yeah, that's kind of my training to a point, and why fish kind of came almost obsessive. But I mean, in all of that, I met my wife when I was 20. We went on a working honeymoon, which I'm not even sure if I'm allowed to say, but we went on a working honeymoon where we went to the Fat Duck, and I got to work in the development kitchen with Heston. And I got to spend some really good time working with a really hyper creative, intelligent group of people that were perfectionists. And, it was an extraordinary experience. So, there's been some amazing things that have come in the last 17 years of being in this industry, and not least meeting my wife. So, yeah, that's me.
When I first got your book, I was really enamored, and I also thought I got to talk to this guy, and I had this concern, is this guy going to be really pretentious, and because how the Epicurean world can be, and then what you do being so specific, I thought that was a possibility. I started watching these videos of you, and I was struck by how kind you come across, how highly you speak of your wife. I'm real sensitive to guys who speak ill of their wives, but it's so common, and you spoke so well of your family, and you seem so generous. And I thought about what you were saying, that you were diagnosed with brain cancer. I think you said you were 8. And
kidney, kidney cancer.
Oh, it was a kidney cancer.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I misunderstood.
I'm quite lucky that it wasn't a brain cancer.
Yeah.
Quite
I don't know how I arrived at that, but anyway, I'm curious just how much that's influenced your approach to life, because so often people who've sort of been touched by death early on really changes the trajectory of how they move through the world. But for somebody I imagine the last few years for you have been a whirlwind. I mean, you got 2 books out, 3 establishments you're running, you've won 2 James Beards Awards, and you certainly could be pretentious if you wanted to be, but you got this real kind streak, and I wanted to just sort of ask you about that approach that you have, and how you treat people.
I put that personally, I put it down to exceptional parenting on my mother and father's behalf, and nothing out of the ordinary, but just growing up in a household that mum and dad ran their own business from the back of our house, and I didn't have to wait for dad to come home from work to see me, and I didn't have to wait for somebody to come pick me up from school. There was so much love and attention in that house that I grew up in, that generosity was just the way we were. And it was making sure that we looked after each other. And now having 3 children, nearly 4, we've got one due in a couple of weeks from now.
Oh, wow.
My wife, is a wonderful person and extremely gifted and talented in her field, which used to be cooking and then became teaching, and now somehow is CEO of all these businesses that we're running. So he's playing the role of many hats. But I don't know, just I suppose one thing that, always stays in my mind is abundance multiplies and scarcity subtracts. And a vibrant culture, whether that's in your family or in your business, creates more than it takes. And so for me, it's really trying to make sure that the culture that we have within our business and within our family is one that's kind. because, technique can be developed, and, the way, we handle fish. I mean, the first thing that a lot of people say when they walk into fish butchery and they want a job is they say, well, my fish skills aren't as good as yours, and I don't know if I can do what you can do. And I'm not expecting that. I just want somebody who cares. They care about the service. And whether it's the service of retail or the service of, pouring a glass of wine, there needs to be some kind of, generosity. And, that, you know what I'm trying to say. We're always just trying to be kind. That's the main thing. And if you've got kindness, then you can teach technique to anybody. You can, So that's just innate. And I don't think, unfortunately, sometimes it can't be learnt. But, I feel privileged to have been spoiled with that kind of upbringing.
Yeah, it's interesting because, big picture, zooming out, it's like the contribution you've made to the culinary world. Well, it's been recognized. It's like, you don't need me to say it. It's been recognized by your industry, but the kindness piece ripples out forever into the world, man, in a way that, the career doesn't always do. So I just want to acknowledge that about you. It's really beautiful.
Thank you.
Yeah. Man, let's talk about what the world of fish cookery has been, and what kind of changes you've been bringing to it, because it's so revolutionary, and it almost is like, how did it take this long?
Yeah. And well, that's a good point. Like, we're 5 years into running St. Peter. And when I opened St. Peter, the intention was to create a dining room that gave people access to a greater standard of fish, and also a greater standard of vegetables, and how we can most simply execute that on a plate without too many bells and whistles. I mean, there wasn't a money tree, raining cash on what we were trying to do. Julie and I were, our own bank. We were trying to make everything work ourselves. And we opened fairly modestly in terms of the setting, but also what I was putting on the plate. One of the first dishes we did was a slice of snapper with a snapper liver, and then a great thick piece of green asparagus next to it, because I think we opened on the 1st of September, which is the first day of spring here in Sydney. And I just thought it was a good summary and indicative of exactly what I wanted the restaurant to be and how I wanted to eat food when I came here. So we opened with that, and it was received really well. Lots of people said, great things. A lot of the reviews that came out, nationally here were, really positive. And it probably was too positive to a degree. And there was a lot of attention on the idea that a husband and wife team were coming along and doing exactly what they wanted. And the fact that we were serving fish offal as well was quite, a stark difference to what was on the market right now. But at the same time, we had fish and chips on the menu, and we did a brunch menu on the weekend that had this sea urchin crumpet on it. And so there was, splashes of creativity all through it. That came really easily for me. And I was trying to hold back a lot of my creativity when we opened, because I was trying not to make anybody feel too uncomfortable, because inevitably I was the one paying the bills. So when all these positive reviews came out, then I was like, all right, well, if you like that, what about this? And I got into this pattern of one-upping myself, and I never rewrote the same menu again. So I kept changing all the dishes. And it really, 3 years later, found myself like exhausted because I hadn't really stopped, but we'd made so much progression so rapidly. And, a lot of that progress came in the form of cutting a fish, like putting a fish out on the bench and cutting it the way that my mentors had shown me. And especially the gentleman that I mentioned before from Fish Face. You do the repetitious movements of filleting a fish and gutting a fish and scaling a fish. And you just look at what you're throwing into the bin. And it's quite extraordinary that if you replace a bin with a tray and you put all of that food onto a tray and you start observing what was otherwise deemed as waste, and you actually start seeing the waste as opportunity, that was when it really became exciting for me. And when we can actually start affecting economic change on the business as well. Sorry, you were going to say?
Well, is it true that the typical yield has been about 40%? You know, as somebody who fishes pretty avidly, it's brutal to watch.
Oh,
In particular, I'll do offshore trips where, you know, you're just getting basically a ticket on the boat, and you go out for the day, you catch, and they cut all the fish for you. You get your fillets at the end, and or you probably say fillets at the end. And watching the collars, watching the livers, you know, we're catching cod relatives, you know, haddock, pollock, big, fat, nice livers, watching all that go over the boat, you know, and the seagulls tearing into it is hard. But so talk to me about what the yield has been and then what you guys have been able to achieve by utilizing more of the fish.
Yeah. So, I mean, a round fish traditionally, where we get taught in college here in Sydney, like with our training, you know, anywhere between 40 and 50% can be an average yield for a round fish. And, you know, I mean, the problem is that the education side of things, when we go and get shown that, you know, this is your yield and then the other is loss. I mean, we need to change the vocabulary into the loss is the opportunity. And what can we do with this? And how can we bring attention and reverence to these parts that so easily get thrown even in the bin on production side of things, but also over the boat, like you just explained. I mean, watching a trawl boat go out and catch fish, and then if it doesn't make the cut, then over it goes again. And it's really, you know, it's so consistent. You look back centuries worth of fishing, it's the same model. Like, we're celebrating quantity over quality. And the reason that I wrote Take One Fish, obviously it's referencing, the title is referencing, there's one fish per chapter throughout that book that I really dial into. But if you can look at the yield of a fish at 90% instead of 45, that is taking one fish and realizing its full value. Because if we only were to see the historical value from a fish, which is 45, then we need to catch another fish to get the rest of the job done. So to think of a fish double its output, that is, in a nutshell, sustainability. So what we've done is I've looked to the world of meat for inspiration for how I can affect change with fish waste. And because the work's already been done, like the butchery model is the most, you know, it's the perfect model. You can look at it any way you like. When you see a pig get, you know, slaughtered, there is a plan and a matrix for that whole animal. The legs come off and get salted for ham. You know, the shoulders get taken off for like long, slow cooked braises. The offal comes out to be eaten that week. Sausages get made. There's a program for every single part of the animal. And so why can't we shift a program into the world of fish? And the second that we do that, there's going to be opportunity for a fisherman to, you know, gain more margin and to get a better return for their work and for their efforts. Because if a fisherman is only being celebrated for what quantity they can bring to market, not so much the quality, then they'll be forever fighting it out at, you know, dollars and cents, as opposed to real money, where they can actually put that little bit of extra effort in to bleed the fish from the gills, to spike the fish and to get it into a nice slurry. And then they can create more value in, you know, perfection and quality, as opposed to just taking. So speaking from a culinary point of view, you know, we've turned fish eyeballs into ice cream. We've turned it into a cracker that's not too dissimilar from a prawn cracker that you would get in a Chinese restaurant. We've rendered the fat of, you know, freshwater fish here in Australia, and we've roasted potatoes in it, but we've also made brioche bread from. You know, the livers get turned into pate. We make salamis out of fish. You know, basically anything that you can execute with an animal, you should be able to execute with a fish. And that's the way that I see creativity. You know, I just see fish as animals. When I look at a swordfish, I see a pig. When I look at a tuna, I see a cow. And all of these things help me and encourage me to modify textures and, you know, even the butchery aspect of things, value adding to a fish to bring comfort and an element of humor and nostalgia to fish is a really powerful thing, because it brings comfort in a space that right now a lot of people are just like, fish eyeball ice cream? What's he talking about? And all this stuff. But to package it in a way that brings comfort and a bit of fun, that's the way that we're going to affect change. So
that's one of the things when I said before, I was worried you might be pretentious about it, and realized you weren't. Was hearing, one of the things was hearing you say, again and again, that you understand, like, hey, this is a little radical for people, and you're not there just trying to present something radical. You really understand what people are wanting to eat and what experience they're wanting to have. So if these kind of dishes sound shocking to folks, they're not being presented for shock value. They are being presented to be lovely to eat as well, right?
And also, let's not discount the fact that, people, there's over 1 billion people that rely on fish as their main source of protein. So what we're discussing here is not new information with regards to cultures around the world that have always consumed every single part of the fish. It's not new knowledge to be eating everything, because for a sheer necessity as to why cultures have to do that. It's not for popularity or for reinventing the culinary wheel. This is just, we need to eat food. We need to eat all of it. It would be stupid and neglectful to be throwing half of the fish in the bin once we've caught it, because we need to feed our family or we need to feed our village. So, but how is it that I then translate that ethos and thinking of that ethical approach? How do we translate that information into a Western context? And how do we encourage the privileged communities that we have here in Australia and in America and in the UK? How do we encourage those who have the ability to just walk into a store and take 2 fillets and pull the plastic back, and that's their dinner? You know what I mean? We need to be enthusiastically coming at this and trying to bring it to the mainstream. One of the dishes we do is a yellowfin tuna cheeseburger. And the reason that I do that is because there is so much loss when processing tuna.
Yeah.
And this is one for you when you get off your boat trip from your bluefin tuna. When all of that big, heavy lateral muscle is left over, which everybody refers to as the bloodline, but it's that big oxygenated muscle that runs through the middle of the fish. That dark muscle, if you can harness that on day 1, day 2, day 3, and grind it through a meat grinder along with the more sinewy, robust kind of muscles of the tuna that don't really present well as a steak, then you can organize yourself into producing a fantastic meat patty that just would not be any more different to a beef burger that you would get at Shake Shack or In and Out. You know what I mean? If not better. And I promise you it's going to be better for you. And that's taking trash, taking fish out of the trash and putting it into something that is glamorous.
We're so excited about that because, one of the things in the hunting and fishing community, at least here in the States, is you'll hear a lot of I eat everything I hunt, I eat everything I kill, I eat everything, that I catch. But it's not true. So much waste. And, it seems like some things are starting to catch on here. More and more guys I see catching, keeping their fish collars and things like that. But the level that you've taken it to really opens things up. I really recommend people go watch some of the interviews, especially they're going to learn a lot of what happens, after you receive the fish. But I wanted to talk a little bit for people who are anglers, about before the fish kind of gets home. Start me at the beginning. Tomorrow I'll be fishing for tuna, but I'm also going to be catching whitefish, like I mentioned, pollock or Acadian redfish, stuff like that. So they come up to the boat. Talk me through your ideal scenario.
We'll get back to the show in a moment, but first, the WildFed podcast is proudly sponsored by Redkill Mountain Homestead Farms. Redkill Mountain in upstate New York is home to the state's largest wild apple savanna. This unique ecotone boasts thousands of seed-grown feral apple trees on a pristine, spring water-fed mountainside overlooking the Delaware River Valley. Unlike the grafted, cloned apples you buy in the store, that's right, even organic apples are genetic clones, Redkill Mountain's apples are different. Just like nature and Johnny Appleseed intended, all the apples there are born from seed. This means that the apples you get from Redkill are unnamed varieties you've never tasted before, and they've never been sprayed or even irrigated. These are truly organic, natural wild fruits. Why does it matter? Wild apples have been proven time and time again to be significantly higher in nutrients, with one USDA study finding as much as 475 times more phytonutrients than their domesticated counterparts. A rich source of the flavonoid antioxidant quercetin, as well as potassium and magnesium, wild apples could be part of your late-season immune health strategy. I eat them the way the folks at Redkill Mountain taught me: skin, core, seeds, and all. Redkill Mountain hand selects apples and gently packs them in boxes to ship directly to your door. While these apples make a great hard cider or other apple products, Ashley and Matthew believe they are best enjoyed simply eaten. That's why they've created their Wild Apple Tasting Box and their Wild Apple Cleanse Kit. When you order, you'll receive carefully chosen apples from a variety of trees while they're at the peak of their ripeness. Go over to redkillmountain.com to check out their apples and other products too, like their limited run apple molasses and bourbon barrel maple syrup. The coupon code WildFed10 gets you 10% off the best, most natural apples you've ever eaten at redkillmountain.com. Now, back to the show.
Yeah, and again, always coming at this from a culinary point of view, but from the research and the conversations that I've kind of had a look at and discussed with peers and things, when you go out onto the water and you go and catch a fish, you throw a line in, the fish jumps onto the line, and then you start reeling it in. And naturally, then that fish is going to be wanting to go the other way because it doesn't want to leave the water. So as it's trying to do that, it's producing lactic acid within its muscle. And as it develops so much lactic acid through that fight, eventually they don't have enough oxygen to sustain the fight. And so they give up, and up it comes onto the boat. And now traditionally, the trawling method, which is, by no means romantic at all. It's the one where they all come up onto the boat. They all flap about in a big tub or on the deck of the boat, and they suffocate and die. The other more intimate version is basically the fish comes up, it's either clubbed on the head or it's spiked, which is ideal. The ikijime Japanese method of killing, where you spike the fish through the head, and it's that instant kill. It's then, that if you are going to go to the extremes here and really look after the fish is then cut at the gills, the fish is then bled fully, and then put into ice slurry. And now, without going too far further, the reason for all the intimate details here is we're trying to remove the lactic acid that's been developed within the muscle. If the lactic acid resides in the flesh of the fish, what happens is very similar to if you put a fillet of fish on a dinner plate and you squeeze lime juice all over it and trying to execute a ceviche. What happens is that lime juice, the acidity from the lime, starts to burn the flesh and cook the flesh.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that becomes a desirable, delicious outcome that's great on tortillas and things. But if you think about squeezing out a lime juice on the inside of the fish and allowing that to burn inside and then work its way to the exterior, that's what lactic acid's doing.
Okay.
And lactic acid is basically, destroying the flesh. It's cooking the flesh from the inside out. So any time that you've ever cut into a fish and it's already got what looks like a cooked complexion, or it's got this milkiness to it, or it starts dropping moisture out of it, then that's because it's been incorrectly handled at the front end. And the same can be said for gill bleeding. If you don't bleed a fish through the gills at the very beginning, any blood that resides within the flesh of the fish that returns back into the muscle then will be the first to spoil, and which is why you get metallic characteristics and all of these kind of iodine-based tastes within fish after days 2 and 3. So you're creating this really short shelf life through incorrect handling, whether it was the kill or whether it was the bleeding. So the blood needs to be completely removed so that you get that glassiness and translucence to the actual flesh. And then the ice slurry is the meat, like the purpose of that is to get the temperature of the fish down. You're trying to, it's done its fight. It's kind of just come out of the water. It needs to cool down. Like you're getting it into an ice slurry to see the flesh, the texture of the flesh firm up. And then once that happens, once it comes out of that ice slurry, you never return it back to any body of water ever again. And I mean, this is something that, polarizes people's opinions. In my opinion, a fish is porous and it takes on water. And by seeing a fish that's correctly handled at the front, then go to a marketplace and see the big scaler dragged over the surface of the skin, only to see all the flesh become bruised and softened through that, motion, the aggressive motion, to get the volume done quickly. And then the knife go into the cavity of the fish and then rip out the organs without any care. And then you can't actually use those organs then because they've all been fairly heavy-handed. And then to put a hose into the cavity and wash out all those blood and impurities. Basically, we're doing that to speed up the process because a lot of fishmongers get paid per fish as opposed per hour. So we're celebrating get through the quantity rather than show any kind of quality towards this thing. So the idea here is that we need to slow down to celebrate the details so that we can grab a higher spend on that fish. When it goes to market, we can fetch a higher value for that fish. And if we're realizing a 90% outcome from it, then fewer fish will need to be taken, so the task will need to be done less. But it's completely flipping the model on its head, because right now we're just in this wheel that's constantly turning and turning and turning and taking, that we're ending up with, like, nobody's wanting to put the brake down on it. Because if we put a brake on it, then the world will inevitably be starved of fish for a moment in time until we spin the wheel back the other way and see it differently. But it's a very difficult conversation. And I know you know this. But I just turned 33 and I'm trying to manage 3 businesses and 3 children and all of that. But then when you become the fish guy who has written 2 books and needs to know all this stuff, you become thrust into this conversation that goes very broadly beyond what you're capable of.
Right.
And you're trying to offer solutions that affect monetary gains of others. And
you need to save the world and help everyone get rich in the process, Josh. What are you doing?
Correct. And I mean, that's really difficult. And I understand how we've got, and I say we as in the world, I understand why the world has gotten to where it's gotten by doing what it's done. But the way it's working right now is damaging the future fish stock for our children and for their children. And so, aquaculture is absolutely a positive, solution. I don't think it's the only solution. And I think where aquaculture's never been better, it could always be better. And I just think that there's so much work to be done. But I believe it starts with mitigating waste, because I think it's just the most ruthless and neglectful thing that anybody can be doing.
Man, I really agree. And if I understand it, you guys primarily are working with wild fish?
Yeah, we celebrate the season. That's kind of what we're, there's so much love. Everybody loves eating a peach in the middle of summer here in Australia and, seeing beautiful thick asparagus in spring. I mean, the same celebration happens when John Dory starts in the middle of winter and the livers are bigger than the fillet. That's so exciting for us. Yeah. So yes, it is. But I just opened Charcoal Fish, which only has a farmed fish on the menu. So I'm not going to sit on one side of the fence. I'm saying that you need to look case by case and see, the sustainable aspects of both sides.
Talk to me. I want to pick apart this thing of the water and the scaling, because I know there's some interrelationship there. But, when I go to the fishmonger, I'm seeing fish sitting on melting ice all the time. Yeah. So I imagine solid state water is the same to you. But talk to people about that, and then how scaling and then getting wet impacts the fish as well.
Yeah, once it goes to the market, and as I kind of explained, the hose that speeds everything up, and then once the fish is gutted and scaled, nearly always you see it getting filleted immediately. The fillets come off, they go onto that ice, and they're piled up because the visual abundance creates, value and excitement to the customer. Like, wow, look at that huge pile of, fillets. Like, I'm going to grab that and I'm going to, this is what I'm going to do. But, okay, are you grabbing the one that's actually sitting on the ice, or are you grabbing the one that's 12 fillets high sitting on top? And how is it that the temperatures can be the same? Basically, water is a huge issue in terms of, going back into the flesh. And then, let me explain it this way. Like if you walk into a meat butcher or any kind of, a person, if you walk into a boutique butcher, or even if you walk into a butcher in a store, whether it's Whole Foods or, anything like that, you see a carcass out on the bench, whether it be as small as a lamb shoulder or whether it's a whole side of beef. Basically, you wouldn't see those guys cutting apart joints. You wouldn't see a prime rib get cut out of the center of, a carcass to then be hosed off because there was a bit of blood and residue on the outside.
That's unthinkable.
It's unthinkable. But think of it this way. What happens if we do? If we were to take a hose to that prime rib, what would the shelf life be on that product? And if I was to then wrap it in plastic post being washed and then put it in my refrigerator that the kids constantly open and close, open and close, open and close, what's going to happen to that piece of meat? Would we then be experiencing something called beefy beef, which is laughable? It is laughable. And it's like, well, no, that's not a thing. But then how is it that we're interacting in a world that continues to say, what's your least fishy fish? And what people are referring to is the trimethylamine, which is an organic compound in a fish, which all fish have. Trimethylamine is present, and when a fish dies, trimethylamine converts into trimethylamine oxide. And through cold chain management and good handling, you can extend how long that trimethylamine oxide, you can control that breakdown. If you can't, and there's inconsistencies in temperature, there's the addition of tap water and all of these things, and fish sitting well above where the actual, coolness is, which is that ice, that starts breaking down into forms of ammonia. And ammonia is what that fishy fish odor is that everybody refers to. And the only way to remove ammonia is through the use of acidic compounds, which is why then we've got repertoire dating back, centuries all throughout French cuisine, which is to take a fish and use lemon or use highly acidic compounds, basically.
Tartar sauce with pickles in it would be another example.
Or even tomatoes and peppers of Provence and the Mediterranean, all the acidic compounds that reside within those ingredients. They are being used to neutralize any odors that will inevitably be apparent within 3 to 4 days of capture because of this really poor methodology and just, this backward system that exists. So when we come along and we do things the way we do, then we can start investigating savory profiles and dry aging and extending, the time in which we have to work with these fish. And that's really exciting.
It's been amazing to hear about how long fish can dry age. I want to get to that in a second. I just want to go back to this piece about scaling because that's the next thing. As a fisherman, the fish comes home, it gets slapped on the table, and we run that meat grinder scaler over it. The bear trap over it. And something I heard you saying the other day was that creates a surface that can really hold water if you were to then apply water again, which almost everybody does to then get rid of all those scales. So talk to us about that and then how you scale a fish.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you think about that bear trap that you drag across a fish, so if you just put down a typical round fish in front of you and you drag that scaler across the surface, what you're doing is you're almost thinking about a comb. You're combing back pockets, and within those pockets sit little discs of scale. So as the pocket opens through that drag process, then the little disc flicks out and ends up in your curtains. And then what ends up happening is you end up with all these empty pockets where those little discs used to sit. And always those pockets remain open. And because it's really fast then to use tap water or a hose to then spray over the top, water goes into those pockets. And then the gesture of a chef, a professional chef, would then be to use their knife or some kind of towel to then comb the scales back the other way to then squeegee that moisture out of the pockets and comb all of the pockets down again. So I can remember being in that fancy restaurant that I worked at, when I was an apprentice, and I would be told that I would need to comb the scales back down using my knife. And what I would get would be this grey, sludgy water that would come out because inevitably it had been washed under a tap. So, and we were told to comb it down every day afterwards. So it just doesn't make sense, because
like, why do it in the first place?
Water is the enemy. And you think about water within the world of charcuterie, it creates bacteria, it harbors bacteria, and moisture breaks down proteins. So for that reason, then, we have gone with this system. Obviously, we still use very soft scaling techniques where we may use a spoon, or we may use a very fine comb that we brush scales off when we're talking about smaller fish like herring and mackerel. But for larger fish species, large cods here, large coral trouts here in Australia, what we do is we cut the scales off. And by cutting off, I mean you put your blade on the tail, and then working with almost like this backwards and forwards, tip moving away from you, handle coming towards you, soaring motion. We then go between the scale and the skin of the flesh, and we're cutting off the membrane that carries the pocket. And once that membrane is removed, you're exposing the skin. And this is the first time that you get to interact with a fish skin. And a lot of the times you'll take a red fish and you'll make it white, because all the coloring of a fish is in the membrane, not in the skin. So, we get Chinese guests coming into fish butchery and they want coral trout, which is, an amazingly, it's a really highly celebrated fish here in Australia that's bright red. And then in our box, it's white. And a lot of the times they'll be like, well, that's not coral trout, I don't want it. And then they'll leave. And so it's quite funny that, we have to actually comb down some of the coral trout to keep them red for a certain market. But, by doing this, we're exposing the skin, and we can condition the skin then to become slightly drier through then the process of hanging it in the fridge, or leaving it out on a wire rack and letting the fan of the cool room, if the cool room you have has a fan, the one that I have doesn't. But we're conditioning the skin so that it dries out slightly, so that when we go and pan fry it or we roast it in the oven, we can create crackling. We can actually create something that is reminiscent of, the best roast chicken you've ever had, or the best roast pork you've ever had. So.
I so wish I could get on a plane and come to Australia right now. The world's so crazy in this moment. It's not realistic. I'm going to go out and eat fish tonight in the town I'm in, and I'm going to be thinking about what they're not doing. But when I look at pictures of you, particularly Take One Fish, I love the way you present it with extra small fish working up to extra large fish. And watching you work with some of those bigger fish, I can see that dry aging the way I'd see it in a venison or bison or a cow, where there's that, particularly in your tuna section, that deep red, almost jewel-like translucency that I imagine comes from that moisture leaving the fish. It's so uncommon to see it. And when I see those pictures, I'm like, I want to work with that. That looks so. When I got the Whole Fish Cookbook, my initial thing, like that part of your brain that wants to reject new information, was like, that's gross. That doesn't make any sense. And then I started reading. It was like, the idea you could dry age a fish kind of blew my mind. I know it's blown a lot of people's minds, and it's part of what's thrust you into the culinary limelight, is this dry aging process you do. But for people who are like, well, that's gross, wouldn't that just make all the worst parts of fish come to the surface? Explain to them what this is all about.
Yeah. Well, firstly, to answer that point, if you were to do the method that exists right now and then hang it in a cool room and let it just chill out for a couple of weeks, it'd be gross. It would be disgusting. And it would be, amplifying what's most hated by so many people, which is that ammonia, the fishy flavor, or polarizing to that, the metallic taint that comes from blood that resides within the muscle. So for us, the process originally it was to create a static environment within our cool room where it can sit somewhere between 0 and -1 degrees without the use of a fan in the cool room. And the reason I say without the fan is, if you were to put a fish into a cool room that sits at 0 degrees with a fan, then you would be drawing too much moisture from the fish and removing what we all love about fish, which is that juiciness and the moisture content. So we're not trying to create jerky, and there is a difference between charcuterie and dry aged fish. A lot of the kind of imagery and I suppose inspiration that came out of the whole fish cookbook from other chefs was this dry aging technique. And from what I saw on Instagram, too many people were taking it too harshly the other way, where they were just drawing so much moisture out of the fish. And these fish looked like they just sat in this vacuum chamber where, all the eyes were drawn back into the head, and the fillet itself looked really dried out. But the ambition here is to maintain day one quality over an extended period of time. And what happens in this static environment, by hanging a fish, what happens is you're not allowing any other fish or any other products basically to come in contact with it, so that you develop a tack on the outside of the fish. And once that tack that you see in meat aging, once that develops, it's almost like you're creating this beautiful seal around the fish.
Like a rind.
Yeah, that's right. And it never becomes moist again unless you add moisture. And you'll find that a fish on day 1 and 2 of that hanging process perspires. Naturally, moisture comes to the surface. And what would be the issue is if that was laying down or was laying next to another fish, and that perspiration then rubs to the next fish and then creates odor. And the best way to explain that is when you get a cast on your arm, if you've ever broken your arm and you get a cast on it, if you lift that cast up, you're going to smell some pretty gnarly stuff. And the same thing can be said with if you were to wrap a fish in cling wrap, or you were to cover it with a J cloth or something like that, or a tea towel to cover the top of the fish. You think that by covering, that's a gesture to, keep it safe and keep it free of bacteria, when really you're creating and harboring bacteria within that little, environment that you've created. You're membrane. You're accelerating the process of breaking the fish down. So by keeping it unwrapped and on a hook and in that environment, we're drawing down on moisture slowly over the course of a couple of weeks. And I'm not saying that dry aging works for every single fish, nor am I saying that it's a one-stop solution for everything. What I'm saying is each fish has a sweet spot where it tastes better. And if I'm personally armed with the knowledge that a swordfish will taste more savory and more like mushrooms on day 18, then that's exciting from a creative point of view. But if I also know that on day 4, I can position it with a piece of grilled fennel, or I can put it with, some beautiful salsify or a white asparagus because it's clean enough to tolerate that type of subtlety, then I'll do that as well. But to just kind of look at it and go, yeah, it's a fish, and I'm just going to put it with this. And the garnish gets more thought and consideration than the flavor profile of what is a greater value on the plate. Because speaking to the customer that comes in that spends $40 on a swordfish main course or a piece of trout, the investment is in the fish. The investment is in, that valuable piece of product on the middle of the plate. It's not in the 33 other garnishes that get enrobed and draped and powdered and everything over the top. It's about the product. And so for us as chefs here in the restaurant and across the group, we always start with what the fish tastes like first, and then we work backwards from that, so we can articulate and understand flavors so that we don't put too much in. It's all about subtraction.
That's so interesting to me because, despite what people say, oh, this is my favorite fish, that's my favorite fish, eating fresh fish the way it's usually done, it either tastes like a white fish to me or like an oily fish to me. And I'm very intrigued and excited by the idea that all of the character of each individual species, part of why I hunt and fish is because I want to know more of the organisms that live on planet Earth. And I want to be intimately involved with all of these different species, because I think human beings are fundamentally very alone the way we're living, and knowing more species is better. And it's a shame that we don't get to know the essential character of each of these different species. So that's like so unique and different than anything I've ever heard, because all you ever hear from people is fresh fish.
You think about like the addition of moisture then would dilute flavor. The subtraction of moisture would then be enhancing flavor. Too much moisture removed then becomes unstable. So what is becoming more flavorful in the form of fish fat and fish oils. So if you're subtracting moisture, you're promoting fats and oils. with too little moisture and too much fat, the suspension breaks and you end up with a rancidified fish, something that goes sour because you've made the, this is the best way to explain it. It's kind of like mayonnaise. If you go and make a mayonnaise and you're whisking oil into eggs and mustard and vinegar, and you keep adding oil, and it gets thicker and thicker and silkier and beautiful, and then you keep adding oil. And then the suspension breaks because no longer does the oil have anything to grab onto in the form of the moisture that was there.
Right.
So it's about trying to find the sweet spot where you've got the perfect amount of moisture that brings the comfort that I'm eating a fresh, juicy, beautiful fish, but then promoting enough of the fat where you're like, wow, I actually have never tasted what this fish has tasted like before. I didn't know that you could taste some clove, or you could taste some, savoriness, like umami that's deep, within the flesh. And so I think it's just ignorant to just kind of grab a fresh fish, eat it, and go, wow, that's the best piece of fish I've ever had. It's like, sure, it's probably the best because you might be eating it on the back of the boat that you just caught it on, and no one in a marketplace has yet put a hose to it or put it through the ringer in terms of the poor conditions that it has to endure before you get it in your pan at home. So it probably is the best piece of fish you've had because it's had the most minimal contact from anybody else. So, but I don't think it's, the total experience that it could be if it was in the right hands, being controlled in such a way. So
I know we only got a couple moments left.
Yeah.
I want to ask you real quick, for those of us without a walk-in, tell us how to store fish at our house.
Yeah. So, I mean, the most very, very basic way of doing something similar, but obviously a little bit, removed, is that crisper chamber in your fridge. That crisper that sits in the bottom of your fridge that you're probably not allowed to put anything else in for your lettuces and, all that sort of stuff. That is a fantastic vehicle to carry fish of a certain size, obviously. Because if you're able to put a fish in there, you're able to control the amount of humidity that comes into that area through those little dials that are on the top of the drawer. You can allow kind of fan to come in, or you can be completely starving it of fan. So if I was to get a fresh fish, I would put it on a cake rack or a wire rack, set it onto a baking tray, and then put that into that little crisper in the bottom of the fridge and put your fish on top. And then at the end of the day, turn the fish over and then shut the drawer again and then come back to it the next day. And if you're planning on cooking that fish that night, take the fish out of the crisper and put it into the main chamber of your actual fridge and allow the fan in your fridge to be blowing that fan over the skin of the fish. And that rapidly speeds up drying the fish skin out so that you can execute then a really crispy skinned piece of fish in a pan. But what the chamber in the bottom of the fridge has done is given it 1, 2, 3, 4, and sometimes 7 and 8 days in that chamber to develop flavor without the extremes of moisture loss, and keeping it in an environment that is cooler than the main chamber of the fridge, which is in constant open, close with everybody that goes to the fridge. So that's one way of doing it. The other one is go and buy a really cheap, old-fashioned static fridge that's got the copper coil wrapped into the back of it, which doesn't actually have a fan in it. Put a rack in the top of it and use some cable ties and just cable tie your fish when it's whole. Do the process that I lay out in the Whole Fish Cookbook where, it's that dry handling and kind of wiping out really thoroughly. Get the fish either on a butcher's hook hanging to the top of the fridge or cable tie it to the top and allow it to sit in there. You will need to do some testing, obviously. It will be cutting a section out of the fillet and then putting it into a pan frying it, tasting it on day 1, going, okay, that's what that tastes like. Go to day 2, go to day 3, go to day 4. And soon, through that just rhythm of checking, you will start articulating differences within the fish. And it might not be the extremes of 3 to 4 weeks that we see, but it might be on day 4, you notice that it is polarizingly more delicious. Or you might find that day 1 was the best day, because what I'm saying is that there is a sweet spot for every single fish, and it's about understanding how far you can push it and what you can do within those parameters to get the best outcome.
Josh, I wish I had several more hours with you. I wish we were in person. The restaurants are St. Peter and Charcoal Fish. The fishmonger is Fish Butchery. Your Instagram and your website at Mr. Niland or mrniland.com. That's MrNiland. Anywhere else you want to send people? I do recommend people watch some of the videos. There's some great stuff of you doing butchery breakdown on the web, but anywhere you want to send folks?
No, that's it. Like, I mean, keep an eye on Mr. Niland on Instagram, because I mean that's where I kind of get as creative as I get.
And your aesthetic there is amazing, by the way. It's beautifully curated.
Yeah, and I do try my best to get back to DMs and stuff, but ask questions, put comments on the page and stuff, and we'll start the conversation. Let's really, I mean, this is all about trying to elevate the standard of a system that is, I believe, broken and that we need to improve upon. So, but thank you so much for the time. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, man. It's so impressive what you've done already, and I'm so excited to see where things go. Thank you so much, Josh. Have a great day.
Thanks for listening to the WildFed podcast. Help us grow this show by subscribing and leaving us a rating and review. It ensures better rankings and more advertiser interest, which translates directly into better shows, more awesome guests, and a constant stream of fresh, new content. Have a question you'd like answered on the show, or a hunting, fishing, or foraging trip you'd like to host us on? Email us at info@wild-fed.com. If you still haven't seen season 1 of the WildFed TV show, you can go to myoutdoortv.com, grab yourself a free trial subscription, and then check out all 10 episodes. Season 2 of WildFed premieres on Outdoor Channel in early 2022. And be sure to visit our website, wild-fed.com, to check out our store for WildFed hats, stickers, and more. WildFed. Food is all around you.